aircraft direction, they fear the winds would be a safety concern, but you're saying that's not so.
I believe it's not so. I believe for 99% of the time it wouldn't be an issue. And of course there are wind issues as the runway is configured currently. I mean, we get winds coming from 270, that is from the west, that often exceed the limits of aircraft, in which case students can't go flying, and the bigger aircraft, if it blows hard enough, they can't come in during the wind limit. So we already have any direction of any runway you're going to have, there'll be certain days where it can't be used due to the direction of wind. But I don't believe moving the runway 30 degrees is going to inhibit the current operation.
The other reason that they've discounted your third option, your preferred third option, is probably one that will make listeners prick their ears up a bit. It's an environmental concern. They say that there are clusters, or there may be clusters of koalas, for example, the wetlands around. So do you concede that maybe your option might cut into the wetlands and destroy some habitat?
It depends, because at the northern end of the runway there is a corner of that wetland that would have to be taken, a very small corner. I think we're talking about an acre or two, if that, in amongst hundreds of acres of wetland. We're talking about a very small area where the runway gets skewed. But I think the other important point to make is that if the option 2, if the council goes ahead, what they are also doing, if they're concerned about koalas, is putting the runway right alongside the wetlands, where they're having it run parallel to the wetlands. If they do, I guess, the option 3, which is my proposal, the runway would essentially, as it travelled south, move away from the wetland areas. And I think the other issue that's very important, that wasn't in my paper at council, is that by twisting the runway 30 degrees, it may be that they're able to get greater length, because one of the issues that the council's also looking at in the paper is to create a situation where they have a longer and stronger runway, so that these bigger aircraft can come in. The current length, not only pavement strength and width, but the current length of the Port Macquarie runway is not conducive to some of the larger aircraft as well, and so that's something else that needs to be looked at. I'm saying there is issues, but the advantages of skewing it is that it reduces it's the environmental impacts of flying aircraft over a very dense populated area versus taking a very, very small proportion of wetland area. I mean, that's I think the quid pro quo that we're talking about.
Well, look, it's important for me to note here that neither of you are sitting here tonight with the intention of having a shot at council. You're both just expressing concerns about some of their proposals, and I guess you're trying to make sure that as residents and users of the airport, you get to have your say about, a really very important local issue. One which, I hasten to add, a lot of people aren't even aware exists. But both of you just have a little lay back for a second, because I am going to have a bit of a shot at council, and it's purely from me, and I feel it's with good cause. I invited Ashley Grummett out here this evening. Now, Ashley is the Hastings Council Project Officer at the airport. Before I could even explain what our discussion would be focusing on, he declined the offer. Now, I have to admit I was a bit surprised, and I asked him why he didn't want to participate, and his reply was that he had no intention of getting into a debate about the airport, which I thought was a bit concerning in itself. Now, I've got to say, I've worked alongside a lot of councils in my time, and yes, most councils have their own independent issues, but I've never come across a more arrogant council than the Port Macquarie Hastings. Every time there's an important local issue to discuss on this program, they refuse, and they often claim it's the time of this program that's the problem. Although I have to say that in Ashley's case, he just told me straight up that he wasn't up for debating the issue when it came to concerned residents. Now, for the record, I offered Ashley the chance to do a phone interview for the sake of his convenience. I explained to him that all I hoped for him to do was to explain how the council would reach their decisions with regard to the airport upgrades. I made it very clear that he would not have to discuss or debate anything with the guests in the studio if that was a problem for him. He told me his management had agreed that participating on 2AFM was not a good idea. Now listen, I'm not going to harp on about it. I just do want to make this point. The ratepayers pay the salaries of these people, and it's their duty to explain their decisions and the processes to the community. Now, 2AFM is the only community station in this region. We have a far greater listenership than Council probably realises, and they are shockingly arrogant for failing to come out here, or at least phone in, and explain this whole airport process to us. In fact, I have to say, it makes me wonder if there's not something up with this whole thing. That all aside, Malcolm and Grant, they're not your views, they're mine. I wanted to know if either one of you had managed to communicate with Council about the concerns you've brought up tonight about the airport and what kind of response you've got.
Tim, what I would say is this. To your point when you first opened on that, was that this is very much a moving target. Council haven't committed any crimes at this point. They haven't done anything. They haven't made any decisions. But when you read the paper carefully, you can't help thinking that the preferred option is the option 2 option, and it may well be a fait accompli. And I don't believe that's in the best interest of the community. It's in the best interest of safety. And I think the other thing is, having such a dense population going to be under the runway when planes are taking off for the north. We've already had a couple of planes come in there, lower fuel, and made it short, didn't quite make it to the runway. That potentially puts them right on top of a very dense community. So my view is work with Council, try and get them to hear us out, but to try and change the angle of the runway, which I think is going to make the approach from the south and the north safer. It's not exactly what Malcolm wants, but it's a better outcome. But as far as Council concerned, I have communicated with Council. I have written a submission. My wife and I have submitted a submission to Council, and I guess we await with bated breath to see their next step.
Well, and Malcolm, you've spoken to Council, haven't you? How do you feel they responded to you, and do you feel, as Grant just said there, that this is a foregone conclusion? They've already made up their minds and now they're just going through the steps?
You have to say that it looks that way. I don't necessarily believe that, but I think it looks that way.
Well, it's suspicious when they won't come on and talk about it on community radio.
Yeah, I invited the same fellow that you did to come and join in this discussion, and he sort of brushed me off fairly quickly. I think that is because he doesn't realise the listenership of the station. But the other thing is, the public in general are very apathetic. They accept whatever they're told, and they don't want to get involved, and they don't want to talk about it. The turn up at the council invitation meeting that we had the other night at Council Chambers was pathetically... there might have been 20 people there. Now, this is ridiculous.
But do you think
and
that...
so they have to think... I think that the council has to think that nobody's interested.
But to defend the people in general, do you think that some people just don't realise that this is happening? And maybe they don't realise because council are very clever at not necessarily going out and promoting, we want your feedback on this issue. Because truly, if they're not out here tonight, I suspect they don't want our feedback on this issue.
Tim, there's a classic quote inside the council briefing paper on this topic, which you've obviously read, and it says here, part of their process in deliberating over this is to ensuring that the quality of life and of the nearby communities and environmentally sensitive areas are not compromised by the development and operation of the airport. That's what they've said in their paper. Yet nowhere in the paper do we see any impact study on the communities that live near the airport. Nowhere in the paper have they suggested that they're about to start some sound checks in
Can
terms...
I just... I think, in fairness to the council, I did read in the discussion paper that there were plans to do noise pollution studies before they drafted their master plan. I'm sure I did read that.
At the end of the day, the airport belongs to the ratepayers and serves the ratepayers of Port Macquarie. And I think that this idea of mine, if you will, or my wife and I, to move the runway, skew it slightly, I'm really want to have a welcome to go to council and work with them as a pilot that flies both fixed wing and rotor wing aircraft and have the discussion about that, because to me, if we can't get Malcolm's thing of moving the runway, then
the airport,
the airport and the whole facilities, then I would like to have some strong debate about the doing that, because I think there's a number of safety issues and that need to be further considered.
And I would be very keen to hear from our listeners tonight. Did you even know that the airport was up for a major upgrade? Did you know that we were going to be soon accepting huge aircraft, 737s, into the area.
And do you care?
And do you care? Are you apathetic? What difference could it make to your life? Thank you very much, both of you, for coming out. I think we've covered very generally the main points there, and we're certainly on the It's Time to Talk program going to be following up on this. So give us a call on 6585 2233 if you'd like to add your voice into the mix.